Now, this story is about Joseph. He's one of my favorite Bible characters. He was his daddy's favorite, too, and that stirred up a mess of trouble.
Hi, kiddo. I'm Grandma Goodie, and I'm here to tell you a Bible story about one of my favorite Bible characters, a guy by the name of Joseph. So anyway, before we start with this story about Joseph, there's something you gotta know, or else nothing else will make sense, because his family life was complicated. Lots of different people had different kinds of families, and we're kind of used to that. But Joseph, he grew up in a family where he had one daddy, and there were four mamas. His daddy, Jacob, well, first he wanted to be married to Rachel because that's who he fell in love with when he was a young man. But it got all mixed up. And so somehow he ended up with four mamas and a whole bunch of babies. But for a long time, his favorite wife, Rachel, she could not have any children. And she was jealous of these other three mamas because they were just having babies left and right. And so finally, God heard her prayers, and she had a little baby, and that baby's name was Joseph. And he's going to be the star of our story. In fact, several stories I'm going to tell you. So anyway, now our story begins when Joseph, the son of Jacob and Rachel, when he was 17 years old. So he's like a teenager. And all of his brothers, now he ended up with like 10 brothers who were older than him. I don't know if you have an older brother, but that could be rough if they don't like you. Well, as Joseph was growing up, his daddy, Jacob, it was just obvious to everybody that Joseph was his favorite. And so, of course, the other brothers, they didn't like that. They'd have to go out and tend the sheep, and Joseph wouldn't have to go with them. But then afterward, their daddy, because Jacob was the daddy of all of them. And so Jacob said, now, Joseph, you go out and see what your brothers are doing. So he went out and he kind of, I don't know if you'd say he spied on them, but that's probably what they thought. He went out and apparently they weren't doing so good because Joseph went running back and he told his daddy the bad stuff they were doing. Now, when I came up, we call that a tattletale, and most people do not like a tattletale. And these brothers already didn't like him, and so they started really hating him, and that's not good when you got a family that's all living close together. I forgot to tell you, they all lived in tents, so they was all living in close quarters. Anyway, everybody was getting mad at Joseph. Well, Joseph was asleep, and one night he had a dream. Then he had this other dream, and he woke up all excited because he thought that God had given him these dreams to foretell the future. And so he gets up and says, hey, everybody, come here. I got to tell you what I dreamed last night. He says, well, first I had this one dream, and me and all my brothers, we were in the fields. And then my dream, I saw like the stalks of grain that we had tied up in bundles. Mine went high up in the air, and then the other ones, they all bowed down. And I thought that was a very strange dream. I don't know what it meant. Then I was still asleep, and I had this other dream. And I saw the sun and the moon and 11 stars, and they all bowed down to me. And so they all got angry, and they said, wait, are you saying that we're going to bow down to you, that you're going to rule over us or something? And they just hated him. And then the daddy, Jacob, he heard all the ruckus, and he came over and he caught wind of what was going on. And I don't know if he minded so much when it's just the other sheaves of grain, like the other brothers. But then the one with the sun and the moon, that kind of might mean like Joseph thought his mom and daddy were going to bow down to him. And he says, wait a minute, that's not right. No, that can't be right. And so he just told him to hush up. And he really should have hushed up because now all of his brothers hated him and they were waiting for a chance to hurt him back. And his father just thought about it and kept it all in mind. So anyway, I'm going to leave the story there, but you got to come back and watch the other stories because It just gets more and more exciting. But let me tell you where you can find that in your own Bible. You want to look in the Old Testament. It's the very first book. It's the book of Genesis, and it's chapter 37, and the verses, the itty-bitty numbers, are 1 through 11. And if you're using the secret code, it's GEN and then 37 and the 2 dots and then 1 through 11. And now you remember, kiddo, Grandma Goodie loves you, but God loves you more.